conversation with Albert Einstein, insights into genius, life, and legacy. Welcome to the Great Exchange, where history's greatest minds and most fascinating personalities come to life. Today, we sit down with none other than Albert Einstein, the father of modern physics and one of the most brilliant minds in history. Professor Einstein, it's such an honor to have you here. Let me begin by asking, how would you describe yourself in your own words?
Thank you for having me. I suppose I would describe myself as a curious thinker, a man who never stopped wondering about the mysteries of the universe, no matter how small or large.
Let's talk about your famous theory of relativity. What inspired your groundbreaking work in physics?
The question of time always intrigued me. I found it puzzling that time seems so rigid, yet so central to everything we experience. My work wasn't born from genius, but from stubbornness. I simply couldn't accept what didn't make sense to me about the classical mechanics of the day.
You've achieved what most can only dream of. But with fame came controversies. People often misunderstood you, even your political beliefs. What do you say to that?
Indeed, fame is a peculiar thing. Many labeled me a pacifist, which I mostly was, but they forget I supported the Manhattan Project during a dire moment in history. I've always believed in striving for peace, but I've also been pragmatic about the challenges humanity faces.
Switching gears, your eccentric personality is legendary, whether it's your famously messy desk or walking barefoot around Princeton. Was this part of who you were, or just how people saw you?
The barefoot stories. I suppose I never cared much for conventions. Life is too short to waste on tying one's shoelaces, and a cluttered desk is a sign of a busy mind, is it not?
One thing people may not know about you is your love for music. Tell us more about that.
Oh, music was my refuge. When equations failed to speak, my violin did. It allowed me to connect with something greater than myself. Music and physics, they are both attempts to understand the harmony of the universe.
Professor Einstein, let's explore a different side of you, your personal life. Let's start with your childhood. What was young Albert Einstein like?
Young Albert was a peculiar child. I was slow to speak. My parents even worried I might never talk, but I was always curious. I remember being mesmerized by a simple compass my father gave me when I was 5. That little needle sparked my fascination with invisible forces, the ones that govern everything around us.
You've mentioned before that school wasn't always enjoyable for you. Why was that?
Indeed, I struggled with the rigidity of traditional schooling. The strict discipline, the rote memorization, it crushed creativity. I preferred to learn at my own pace, reading about topics that genuinely fascinated me, like math and philosophy. Luckily, I had great support from my family, especially my mother, Pauline.
Speaking of family, your relationships were fascinating. Can you tell us more about them?
Relationships. They are as complex as quantum mechanics. My first wife, Mileva Maric, was a brilliant physicist in her own right. We shared a deep intellectual connection at first, but life's pressures, my career, raising children, strained our bond. My second wife, Elsa, was a source of stability and warmth. She understood me, quirks and all.
Your relationships with your children also had their ups and downs. What can you share about that?
Fatherhood is a humbling experience. My son Hans Albert followed in my footsteps as a scientist, though he worked in engineering. We had our differences, but I was immensely proud of him. My other son Edward had a tragic struggle with mental illness. It broke my heart to see him suffer. Those were difficult times for me as a father.
Let's talk about friendship. You collaborated with some of the greatest minds of your time. Who had the most significant impact on you, personally or professionally?
Friendships were a treasure. I particularly cherish my exchanges with Niels Bohr, even though we often debated fiercely about quantum mechanics. On a more personal level, my lifelong friendship with Michel Besso was special. He understood me in ways few others could, and I often said, Besso does the talking, I do the thinking.
Albert, many people don't know about the struggles and failures you faced before fame. What kept you going during those tough years?
Failure was a constant companion in my early career. I couldn't find a teaching position for years after graduating, so I worked at a patent office. Yet even in that mundane job, I found opportunities to think creatively.
Professor Einstein, your journey to becoming one of the greatest scientists in history wasn't an easy one. Can you tell us about the struggles you faced early in your career?
Where do I begin? After graduating from the Polytechnic Institute in Zurich, I struggled to find a job. Imagine applying to so many academic positions and being rejected repeatedly. It was humbling. I eventually found work at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me time to think and, more importantly, to dream.
It's fascinating how your time at the patent office became the birthplace of your most revolutionary ideas. How did that happen?
I suppose the monotony of the job had its perks. Evaluating inventions taught me to think practically, but my evenings were my own. I used that time to develop my theories. You might say that my miracle year in 1905 was born out of quiet persistence. It was then I published 4 papers that would change physics forever.
Let's talk about 1905, what many call your annus mirabilis, or miracle year. 4 groundbreaking papers in 1 year is unheard of. What drove that extraordinary productivity?
It was a rare confluence of curiosity and focus. I explored ideas that had been brewing in my mind for years. First, I tackled Brownian motion, proving the existence of atoms. Then the photoelectric effect, which laid the groundwork for quantum mechanics. My third paper introduced special relativity. And finally, that beautiful equation, EMC2. I wasn't aiming for fame, I simply wanted to understand how the universe works.
Your paper on special relativity is a cornerstone of modern physics. Did you realize its significance at the time?
Honestly, no. I thought it was an interesting concept, but I never imagined how it would ripple through the scientific community. The idea that time and space are relative was shocking, even to me. But science thrives on challenging conventions, and this was no exception.
Your work on general relativity in 1915 took that even further. How did you come to the idea of bending space and time?
General relativity was the most challenging intellectual endeavor of my life. I was obsessed with gravity and how it could be unified with my earlier work. When I finalized the equations in 1915, I felt like I had glimpsed into the mind of God.
Your theory was famously validated in 1919 during the solar eclipse, when scientists observed the bending of starlight. What was that moment like for you?
I still remember the telegram confirming the results. It was exhilarating. To know that something so abstract, a set of equations, could predict such a phenomenon was deeply satisfying. Overnight, I became a household name, though fame was never my goal.
Let's talk about your contributions beyond physics. You received the Nobel Prize in 1921, but not for relativity. It was for your work on the photoelectric effect. Did that surprise you?
It did, but not for the reasons you might think. By then, relativity was still controversial, whereas the photoelectric effect had practical applications in technology. I was pleased to see my work recognized, but I often joke that people like the simpler ideas better.
Your professional journey is nothing short of legendary. If you had to pick one moment that defined your career, what would it be?
That's a difficult question. Perhaps it wasn't a single moment, but rather a mindset. The willingness to question everything, even the foundations of physics. If I hadn't challenged Newton's ideas, who knows where we'd be today?
Professor Einstein, your legacy has inspired countless scientists. What advice would you give to young people who want to follow in your footsteps?
Think freely. Don't let the world impose limits on your curiosity. And remember, mistakes are just stepping stones to understanding. In science, as in life, the pursuit of truth is its own reward.
We've had the privilege of sitting down with one of history's greatest minds. Albert Einstein's journey from a struggling graduate to a pioneer of modern science is a testament to the power of curiosity and perseverance. Stay tuned for more illuminating conversations on The Great Exchange.